Hello, welcome back to Silver Thread Sewing. I'm Diane. Today I wanted to share a couple things with you that's coming up. I'll start by saying I'm wearing Newlook 6708, and I made this version, and I did put some elastic in the sleeves. I had a couple comments last week on my Friday sews, the one in rayon challis, and I did agree. It was, everything I make is too big. And I know that, but I'm always afraid of getting it too small. And I've had that happen so much in years past. So now I err on the side of making everything too big. But I sized down on this one, and this one is a cotton lawn. And it's just a gingham print that came from Fabric Mart Fabrics. And they still had some last time I checked. And if I can find it, I will link to it below. But it's just a really pretty, I think the color is blueberry and white. And it has these gathers on the sleeves. And I took the bias binding, and instead of turning it to the inside, I just turned it to the outside so it would give just a little bit of interest around the neckline. And here I just put I use an elastic, just a little piece of elastic for the button loop. And then I just put a little rounded button to close it. And I left less of a opening in there than I did on the last one. It said to sew up to the large dot that it's above the center, in the center back seam. You have 3 notches, and you're supposed to sew up to the circle above that. But I sewed up a little bit farther this time because it just seemed like it was so much openness back there. So I did sew it up a little higher this time. But I'm real happy with it. I like the sleeves. I can raise my arms comfortably. And this elastic, I think, does look better. And I'm just real happy with how this one has turned out. I like it much better than the rayon challis one that did just kind of swallow me whole. So the thing I wanted to talk to you real quick about is a sewing workshop. So back when the hurricane happened back last September, we had supplies come in from all over the country. It was incredible, and I've talked about that before, so I won't go into all that again. But one thing that we were always finding that people were looking for was laundry detergent. So we had a workshop years ago about making laundry detergent, making deodorant, making lip balm, and what else? There was another thing that we made. But just using more readily available ingredients and making your own. So during the time that people didn't have laundry detergent, one of the ladies that had the recipe to make it had made a lot of liquid laundry detergent. Now, I also have a recipe to make powdered laundry detergent, kind of the same thing. But, and if anybody's interested in that, I'll be glad to link them or send them to you in an email or something, whatever you want. But I do have those recipes. Anyway, since then, the workshop was a real success, and people seemed to enjoy learning to make their own laundry detergent. So it was discussed that we maybe could do other workshops that people might be interested in. So one was a sewing workshop. And Callie and I were asked if we would kind of do that workshop. Now, as you know, I am no expert sewer whatsoever, and I know that. But what my thoughts went to, when you say sewing to a person who doesn't really sew, what do they usually think? They usually think quilting, or maybe they think mending, or maybe they think sewing a button on, or occasionally maybe they think sewing garments. So all of that is sewing, and so is a lot of other. There's a lot of fiber arts, embroidery, cross stitch, crochet, knitting. All that is fiber arts. So when you say, do you want to take a sewing workshop, people have different ideas of what you're talking about. So I had come up with the idea that we would have kind of a introductory sewing workshop, and maybe have basic and practical sewing ideas. So I worked up a little sheet here to explain to people what we're going to be doing. And I just typed it up on the computer, and I'm going to tell you what I put on it. And if you've got different ideas, it'd probably be too late for this one, but I'd be happy for you to share your ideas if you could think of other things that I've left off. I just said, welcome to our sewing workshop. We're glad you're here. Today is a beginner class to understand what types of sewing you might be interested in. Practical sewing, such as hemming, sewing a button on, mending, repairing clothing, craft sewing, quilting, cushion covers, home deck sewing. If you already know some basic practices, maybe we can share a few ideas to make things like threading a needle easier. Using beeswax on your thread to prevent knotting and twisting. Doubling your thread in order to use less stitching through the button. We'll discuss having the correct needle for the project, hand sewing versus sewing machine. We will go over threading a machine, machine safety, what projects might be done better by machine or better by hand stitching, sewing supplies that are good to have, such as the correct needle again for your project, thread, scissors, measuring tape, or tape measure, because I never know which of those is right, so I did put a smiley after that, but I put both measuring tape and tape measure. Seam rippers, straight pins, ironing surface, sewing machine. We will briefly discuss different types of fabric, such as quilter's cotton, cotton lawn, knits, denim, linen, and synthetic fabrics. We will be sewing a button on and showing how to measure pants for hemming, mending techniques to help our clothes last longer, and if you want to use a sewing machine, we're going to have materials to make either a coaster or a quilted placemat. Now, I have been cutting out squares of all different colors. So the little 4-patch coasters that I have, I think I've done a little bit of a video and shown you how I do that. I've cut out flannel for the back piece, the piece that would go down on the table. So you would just take the the flannel, and then you take your pretty fabrics, your cottons, and you just fold them in half. And you put the wrong sides out. So wrong sides are all out, folded side is in, right side of the bottom fabric is up. And you do that all the way around. So being careful to keep all the edges even, which mine are not here the way I'm holding it. You just sew around the outside perimeter of these little squares. And I do like to press as I go so they all stay together nicely. But then you clip your corners, turn it out, and you have the cutest little coaster. They're quick, they're easy, and they look really different. They're unique. So I like using the flannel on the back so it's absorbent. If you set a cup or a glass or spill something, that flannel is more absorbent, and also it's really soft against your furniture. So I tend to like flannel for that bottom piece. It doesn't really show much, so it could be a pretty color or not such a pretty color. But I've got all those blocks. I cut them at 5.5 by 5.5. So I'll let you know how all that turns out. You know, I'm going to take a couple sewing machines, and there'll be a couple other people there, I think, that know about sewing machines. So I will let you know how that goes after it goes. I will check back in with you, and I hope to see you early next week with this video. See you soon, and wish me luck. So it's much later in the day now. We had our sewing workshop. We had 7 people there. I was real worried about being able to fill an hour with stuff that would keep them interested, but we were there a little over 2 hours. A couple people had to leave before that, but then others wanted to stay longer. So we started out with, I went over the information sheet that I had for them and gave them out their little sewing kits and the tape measures. So I asked kind of what everybody was there for, what their intended or hoped topic for the day would be. And one said, I can't thread a needle, I've never sewed on a button, I can't do anything. And another one said, I can use the sewing machine some, and I want to learn to quilt. And another one, there was a lady and her 12-year-old daughter that came, and they both just wanted to be there and, you know, for the introductory workshop. So anyway, I first showed them how to measure to cut off a pair of pants. And just by turning them wrong side out, knowing your inseam, I showed them the difference in the inseam and the outer seam, and how to measure and mark and turn up the hem, and if it had to be cut off. And So then I let them, I took some of the, I don't think I have any left. I took some of that fabric, the striped fabric that I tried to make the overalls in, because it had lines on it. So I'd cut out squares out of that, and I let them practice ironing up a 1/4 inch and then the hem. So I think we did 1 inch hem, but I explained to them, you could do different amounts. But I explained the difference and why you needed to turn up your raw edge, turn it under first, and then hem with the raw edge. And then I showed them how on that same piece of fabric to do a blind hem stitch. And they really picked that up well. There was one that kind of, her stitches showed more, and I kind of showed her a different way to do it than what she was, although I had demonstrated it first. She hadn't really understood it, and after I showed her, she did it perfect. She started it all over, and she did it perfect. And I showed them the button technique that I showed. I made the knot in the thread. Well, first of all, I took them a larger eye needle and explained that some are so tiny. So I took a little bit larger of an eye needle, and I showed them how to run their thread through beeswax. And then you have your one strand, and then I doubled that again and showed them how to thread that through, and how it only takes about 2 or 3 passes that way with the needle. And then I showed them how to come back up underneath the button and run the thread around the button 3 times or 4 times, and then make a knot, and all your knots are under your button, and the backside looks really neat. So I'm sure y'all know all that, but that's what I showed them. So I showed them blind hem, then on that same piece of fabric, let them do a button, and then we did a hem on the machine. And then I let them choose the fabrics they wanted to use, and we made the little 4-patch coasters. So then a couple of them wanted to practice sewing straight lines, and I had taken some like 3-inch strips, like I do a strip quilt, and let them just practice sewing those together up and down. And everybody wanted to come back. They want to do it again. A couple want to learn to quilt. A couple want to use the sewing machine. The little 12-year-old girl made me so happy. She said, I think I have the bug, because as soon as she started sewing on the sewing machine, that's all she wanted to do. She loved it. And that just made my heart happy, because I love it when young people are interested in sewing. So anyway, while all that was fresh on my mind, I just wanted to come back and tell you, I have been working a little bit on I decided that I would make this shirt again, which is, I showed you at the beginning of this video, but I decided to make it in a knit and just see how it would go. So I had sized down, and I've got it almost finished. And I put some elastic in the sleeves, just a little bit. I didn't put much so it wouldn't be tight. This one drew up just a little bit when I washed it in the washing machine, and so I didn't make it as tight as I could have, but I like that. It just brings them in a little bit. And I really would like to put a tie of some sort around the bottom, but I think I'll probably just leave this one alone. It fits really well, and I'll show you that in my makes video. I'm still finishing this and working on my French poetry dress, the Pleiades dress, I think is how I said it before. And if that's not right, you know what I mean. It's close enough. But anyway, I'm going to try to get this out this first of the week. I'd just like for you to know how the sewing class went. And I've still got all those same shirt patterns out. I've got a bunch of the pieces cut out. And so I'm hoping not to have to do too much this coming week. And maybe I'll get to sew some. But I did want to share with you about this sewing workshop. So I hope that everyone's well, and I hope you will sew as much as you want to. Don't ever give up on it, because as long as you sew, you'll never have time or money to get into any trouble. Just ask me how I know. Thanks.